Yeah.
Today we're going to hear about something that we all hear about periodically, and it's human trafficking. And our presenter today is Del Chittim. Tell you a little bit about Del, his background. He serves as the Chief Operating Officer at Rescue Freedom International, leading their efforts to combat sex trafficking around the globe through a vast network of local partners. Prior to coming to Rescue Freedom, he served as the Executive Vice President of Southeastern University in Lakeland, Florida, and as the Director of Finance and Development for the Northwest Ministry Network. He has served as a consultant to over 350 nonprofit organizations, has been a contributing author, and has served as a university professor for over 10 years. Del founded the Calibrate Conference in Seattle and has been named one of the nation's young influencers by Catalyst Conferences. He has a BA from Northwestern University and an MA from Seattle U. In his spare time, he enjoys the outdoors and is an avid alpine climber and skier, and Northwest native, of course. Del grew up climbing with his dad, summited most of the major peaks in the Cascade Mountain Range, including climbing Mount Rainier 7 times. He co-founded Climb for Captives in 2008, which began his involvement in the fight against human trafficking. Del and his wife live in Silverdale, and they have 3 children. So let's welcome Del up and find out a little bit of international.
Good afternoon. It really is an honor to be here. I do a fair amount of travel for my work, and it seems like no matter where I go, I run into the influence of Rotary around the world in every country, and so it's fun to be part of seeing the amazing work that you guys are doing, the investment that you're making. I really do believe that Rotary makes this world a better place. So thank you for all that you are doing as an organization. And here to share with you about human trafficking, a difficult issue. It's a huge issue. And so I'm going to dive right in. I think one of the best ways to help us understand the complexity of this is to tell you a bit of a story about one of the many girls that we work with around the world that have been affected by this. I actually met her in Madrid last year, and we'll call her Sarah. We have to protect the identities and names of these girls. Many of them, their traffickers or pimps are still after them around the world. But Sarah was actually from Brazil, grew up very poor, had an abusive father, went through a series of foster homes, foster families. When she was in her late teens, a young man told her, "I can help you escape this life that you're in if you'll just escape with me to Spain. If you'll run away with me, I can get you a new job, you can start a new life." And she did, and as soon as they got into Europe, he took her passport, took her money, and forced her into prostitution. She was serving in a place called Calle de la Resina, serving up to 30 men a night when we first met her. She had just turned 18 at that point. There were three other women in his stable, was what we call it, other girls that he had said the same things to lure them into this kind of a life. As Sarah, when she first got there, as many girls do, she was trying to think of, how do I get out of this? How do I escape? How can I run? And this guy had done this many times, and he approached her. He said, "Sarah, you need to know what I will do if you ever leave. I know who your sister is. I know the school that she goes to in Brazil. I will go back to Brazil. I will hunt down your younger sister. I know exactly the way in which she walks home from school every day. I know where she is alone on that route. And I will kidnap her, and I will drag her back here to Calle de la Resina, and she will take your place." Sarah felt trapped. She felt alone. She felt tricked. She felt like she had no options and no way out. And that is really the story of sex trafficking. I see hundreds of times over around the world, time and time again. Sorry, I'm going to try to keep up with my slides here. Get carried away with the talk side of it. But right now, there's 21 million slaves in the world today. That's more than any other point in human history. All forms of slavery included in that, so that's bonded labor, that's child slavery, it's child soldiers, it's humans being trapped for their organs, and it's sex slavery. 4.5 million of that 21 million number are those that are in forced prostitution or sexual exploitation. It's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world, and it's the fastest growing criminal enterprise. It's passed up arms dealing now. It's more lucrative than that. It's just behind drug trafficking. International Labor Organization tells us it's a $150 billion a year enterprise. 80% of those that are exploited are women, 50% are minors. From our partners, we're learning that the average age into forced prostitution internationally is about 12 to 14 years of age. The average lifespan, our partners tell us now, is down to about 10 years once a girl is forced into prostitution. So many don't make it past their 21st birthday. That's what's happening on a global scale. And it's because of those statistics that over the last 8 to 10 years, this issue has risen to the top, and many consider this to be the Holocaust of our generation. And in the face of this, what we've seen over the last 10 to 12 years, hundreds of people around the world have risen up and said, not on my watch. This is not going to happen as long as I have breath. And we've seen hundreds of organizations around the world, people with huge hearts, standing up and saying, I am going to do whatever I can to put a stop to this thing. And hundreds of organizations began to rise up, and that's actually when I started to get involved as well. This is just going to distract me. I'm just going to park it there for a minute. And in 2008, a group of friends of mine and I, as Larry said, I love to climb mountains, and we would climb mountains every summer. That was our hobby, and we saw so many people raising funds, inviting people into their favorite cause through running triathlons and marathons and 5Ks and 10Ks or just walking. And we thought, well, why couldn't we do this with climbing? And so on Independence Day in 2008, we were climbing Mount Rainier. We said, why don't we celebrate our freedom by setting other people free? And so we sent out an email to friends and family that year, a couple weeks before the climb, wanting to raise $14,410, $1 for every foot of Mount Rainier that we were hoping that we would summit and climb. And by the time we came down from the mountain that evening on July 4th, $20,000 had come in just a couple weeks. And we thought, wow, there's something to this. Let's keep doing this. So every year we've been climbing mountains. Last year we raised $350,000 on our climb, and crossed the $1 million mark raised over the last few years, just doing what we were going to do anyway, doing what we loved to fight what we hate. And so what we would do, we would take these dollars and we would invest them in these great organizations around the world with people with huge hearts that were fighting this incredible issue. And as we started to track over the few years of these organizations and what they were doing, we started to see some of them closing down. And many of the organizations that we were investing in were struggling, and we came alongside many of them and said, what is it that's causing problems? Why are you going belly up? And one by one, they told us the dominant thing were three different things that they said. One was, of course, funding. We're so caught up in the work that we're doing, we feel like we don't have time or the expertise or the contacts to go out there and raise money. They said the other thing that we're struggling with is trauma therapy. The victims of sex trafficking, the survivors that come out, actually have a higher rate of PTSD than that of combat vets. And these people with huge hearts, but maybe not a PhD in trauma therapy, were coming alongside women and children that had been raped maybe 30 times a night for 5 years. And the level of trauma that they were dealing with was so high, they didn't feel like they had the expertise to really help them as they should. And the third thing they said is that we got into this because we had a big heart to help, but we had no idea we were going to end up running a nonprofit. Now we've got this board that wants all these questions answered, and we got financial statements, and we don't know how to read them, and I've got HR issues of hiring a staff, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't think I can keep going. And that's at the same time when we saw a lot of organized crime making progress. Cartels, mafia, crime syndicates were networking across borders more than they ever had before. The cartels are realizing that when you sell a kilo of cocaine, you have to go back and make more. But if you force a little girl into prostitution, you can sell her multiple times a night, every night, for 10 years until she's dead. And it began to be added to the menu of crimes that these crime syndicates were actively engaged in because of the profitability. So we were seeing more organizations that were fighting this shut down rather than open up crime was actually on an increase of growing this. It was one of their most profitable businesses that they were doing. We realized we couldn't just continue to fund these organizations to try to keep them open. We actually had to help them flourish. And that's where Rescue Freedom came in. Said, what if we could launch an organization that would fix these three problems around the world for hundreds of organizations that they had the right ingredients, they had the right heart to fight this issue, but they were lacking the tools. And so that's what we do. We work in 8 different countries right now. We have about 15 different partners that are running 130 different programs across the spectrum to fight trafficking, working with 48,000 women and children right now across the globe. Running programs from night shelters to safe homes to tutoring girls that were trafficked at 12 and haven't been to school since, helping them with college scholarships and vocational training to pursue their dreams, prevention programs, everything that we can possibly do to help in this thing called trafficking. I'm often asked, what is it that you would use to explain this issue of trafficking? It's such a complex issue. How do you get your arms around what's really going on out there, and how do you present a holistic approach to really fighting this issue? And I think the best way to describe it is telling you a little story. Imagine that you were walking through the forest and you came to a huge river. And to one side you watch this river go down, cascade over a set of falls. And you see at the bottom of the falls women and children coming out of the river that have gone over the waterfall, and they're battered and they're bruised and they need someone to help them. But at the same time, you notice out in front of you in this river, there's still women and children that are carried down this river and they're headed towards this falls. And that's trafficking. You're faced with this difficult decision of, do we jump into restoration? Do we jump into safe homes and try to help those that are already been trafficked get out of that life and provide the trauma care that they need? But at the same time, we also need people to work with law enforcement that will jump right down to the river, rescue those that are currently being trafficked, and help them find their way out. And at the same time, we also need this approach to get up to the headwaters and figure out, now, why in the first place would these women and children be in a place that someone could throw them in the river, and who's throwing them in the river in the first place? What's going on? What's at the very headwaters and the tributaries that's contributing to this issue, and how do we get to the bottom of that? That's the complexity of the issue, and with Rescue Freedom, what we do is we come into a country and we find these partners that are working on this issue. We make sure that they have a holistic approach, that it's not just aftercare, but they're also doing prevention, that it's not just the empowerment of those that have gone through this trafficking and giving them an education and a voice to speak out and begin to witness and testify and to motivate legislation, but they're also doing the efforts to do rescue right now for helping those that are out, getting out of this trafficking that they're in currently. A holistic strategy and a holistic approach. I think a lot of times a question that we get is, why does sexual exploitation even begin in the first place? Where does it come from? And I think if we go back to Economics 101, if you remember your supply and demand class, anytime there's demand that outstrips supply, it's going to create a market, and someone will find a way to create the supply to meet that demand so that they can make a profit. In Seattle, just a few years ago, there was a study done by a research university to figure out what the demand looked like here in our area. Just in the city of Seattle, on one website, during one 24-hour period, they studied how much demand there was, how many people were actually trying to buy sex online in that 24-hour period. And in one website, in one 24-hour period, 6,847 men attempted to buy sex in Seattle. With that kind of demand, there will be people that will try to create the supply. And the supply chain looks different. The way in which people go after creating supply looks different in every country that we work around the world. But what is the same is that they're trying to exploit the weaker edges of society. In the US, it's largely foster care. So 75% of the women and children that our partners here domestically work with are from the foster care system. If you're talking about Eastern Europe, our program team just came back from Eastern Europe, training dozens of organizations there and building new partnerships. For there, it's the extreme poverty. Moldova, Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, in some of those countries, the unemployment rate for those under 30 can be up to 50%. They're so desperate. They're easy targets for traffickers to lure them into this issue. In India, it's just gender inequality. The UN tells us that India is the worst place in the world simply to be a woman. And there you can be trafficked simply because you're female. So you have this demand, you have this supply. Buyers are being offered this supply through suppliers that are exploiting the orphans, exploiting those that are in poverty. And everywhere we work, it looks just a little bit different, but those are definitely commonalities. So that you have this demand, you have the supply. So what is it that creates demand? What is it that creates sex buyers? I think is kind of the big issue that right now everybody in this niche area is trying to get their arms around. And there are a ton of factors that drive someone to become willing to buy sex, to buy another human, to rent another human for an evening. But the biggest one that research is pointing to is pornography. All the research points to pornography as being the biggest driver for sex buyer creation. That's where most sex buyers start. And what's once kind of a boys will be boys issue is now something that's affecting 85% of our young men and 50% of women. Pornography spans across the globe now. In the 2016 annual report from just one porn site called Pornhub, probably the biggest porn site out there, there was enough data downloaded from their site last year to fill 194 million USB sticks. That's enough to circle the moon. That's 1 year, one site. Last year on Pornhub, the number of hours of porn watched equaled 5,246 centuries. Centuries. 1 year, one site. But here's the thing, the tide is turning against this. 3 states have now declared pornography a statewide health crisis because of its effect on us, because they're seeing how it's affecting and driving trafficking. 3 of the hotel chains, Hilton, Hyatt, and Intercontinental, they've all banned it because the research showing what it's doing to us is something that they don't want their business to have any part in. It's not unlike the tide turning on smoking in the late 70s. That's what's going on with pornography. So although this is a dark issue, I want you to hear there is hope. I want you to hear that there is change. I want you to hear there's an army being raised up around the world of young women and young men that are saying, not on our watch. We're not going to allow for this. Just got a couple minutes here. We'll take a few questions, but some people say, what can we do? How do we get involved? How do we actually help be part of solutions to this issue? I think one of the biggest pieces that I would invite you into today is just be a voice. I'm hoping that maybe something said in these few minutes would spur somebody here to say, I want to be an abolitionist. I want my voice to be heard on this issue. I want to spread this among my community, my friends, my family, that this would not happen on my watch. We need more voices to convey that modern slavery is just as repulsive to us as historic slavery. Our culture has, by and large, said historic slavery is wrong, right? We would be repulsed if there was a kid that would show up at our house on Halloween dressed as a historic slave owner from the 1800s. We would think that's morally reprehensible. And yet, for $34.99, you can buy a pimp costume at any party city around the country. Why? That's just the modern equivalent of a historic slave owner. Why do we think that's funny? Why would we allow for that? Why has our culture not unilaterally condemned that? We need voices that will rise up, who are wise and intelligent, not booing our culture, but just saying, hey, wait a second, I think we've got this wrong. And we'll stand up and say, no, not anymore, not on my watch. I think the other thing that I would just nudge you towards is to adopt a cause, and you're a Rotarian, so this is an easy one. Many of you probably have multiple causes. Giving is nothing new in our country. Rockefellers, Fords, others have pioneered philanthropy. It's a cornerstone of our society. But what's becoming interesting to me is how common it is for businesses today to adopt a cause. There was an Edelman brand study in 2014. It showed the quality and price when they're equal, the most important factor in buying decisions is now the purpose behind the brand. When given a choice between two competing products, 72% of Americans chose the product associated with a cause. How many of you have ever heard of Tom's Shoes? Tom's Shoes. Anybody know what their model is? Their business model? Dan?
Basically, buy a pair of shoes and we'll give you a pair.
That's right, 1 for 1. You buy a pair of shoes and they give a pair of shoes to somebody who needs a pair of shoes somewhere in the world. And if you've ever had a pair of Toms, they're not great shoes. They don't look all that awesome. They're canvas, they wear out quick, but they have 500 million in sales every year because of the story behind the brand. It may not be the best product, but it's the best story. And people are clamoring to buy their shoes. We have a lot of businesses that partner with Rescue Freedom, weave their story into our story. Sozo Wine, Cafe Lusso, Suja Juice, Purpose Boutique, Fairway Mortgage. And they give a portion of their profits to what we're doing so their customers will feel like they're not just buying wine or coffee or a mortgage, but they're actually setting someone free from the most horrific form of slavery out there. So I would encourage you, adopt a cause. Maybe this isn't your cause, but have a cause. Align your business with that cause. Do something to say, let me bring people into a broader story with what I'm doing in business to help others align with something that really makes the world a better place. Final thought, I hope that we never lose hope that we can beat this. There's a lot of people that they think we're stuck with this issue. I think there's a lot of people out there that say, well, the root cause is the dark hearts of men who buy sex. And we'll always have that. People can't change. That's not true. We see that all the time. People do change. I don't know if you've heard the story of guinea worm. Guinea worm is a disease where there is no vaccine, there's no medicine. The only cure is you have to change the behavior of those that are infected. And when people are infected, the guinea worm, it goes to their lower legs and it works its way out of the skin. And the people that are infected feel like their legs are on fire and they have to get into the water somehow to quench this feeling in their legs. And what happens is when the worm is exposed to water, it sends out millions of larvae. And then those larvae, of course, are ingested by the people who drink that water. And so this has been a curse on the African continent for generations. Jimmy Carter in 1986 said one of the goals of the Carter Center would be to eradicate guinea worm from the planet. People thought he was crazy. There were, at that time, 26,400 villages that were infected throughout Africa with guinea worm. And to do so, to eradicate it, they would have to stop people from behaving a certain way, and the way in which they really desperately wanted, and there would be people that have to stand up against their neighbors and their friends and their family and say, no, you can't do this anymore. It's hurting the rest of us. Well, today there are 2 cases of guinea worm in the world. It lives only 18 months in its host until if it doesn't begin to propagate, it dies. We're months away from guinea worm being the 2nd disease in the world behind smallpox to be completely eradicated from the human race. Jimmy Carter said it was my bucket list. I want that to die before I do. I think he's going to make it. People can change. Men can stop buying sex. Women and children can be valued. Porn can be seen as more of a menace than just some harmless pastime. Yes, this worm of slavery has worked its way into society, but we can stop it just as our forefathers did. We can, and we must. By the way, Sarah, the girl I told you about at the beginning, she was rescued by her partner in Madrid late last year. She was, last time I saw her, meeting with law enforcement, put her trafficker away for good and to free the girls that he was still selling every single night. Eradicating that worm, ending slavery one life at a time. I want you to know we're seeing this army of women and children around the world that are rising up, and it's their voices that are going to motivate legislation. They're survivors. It's their stories that will stop the buyers in the tracks. It's their testimony that will put those traffickers behind bars for good. And there is this army rising up. I hope that you will join them and continue to do the great work that you're doing in Rotary to empower them to live lives that will put away this injustice, this great injustice of our time. Thank you so much for letting me come.
2 questions? What? Somebody out there's got a question. Kelly?
Yes.
What countries are you working in, and how did you choose those countries?
Yeah, countries that we're working in right now are U.S., Spain, Moldova, Tajikistan, India, Thailand, Bangladesh. We just opened a new place in Costa Rica last week. So those are our primary countries. A lot of it was due to need. So there's tremendous need in those countries right now for services. And some of it was the relational networking of providers that all know each other around the world, the work that they're doing. So it was both strategic as well as just the vetting process was aided along by those that we already knew. So
Last question, Jim.
The groups in the different countries that are doing this, they're different countries. Are they all different people that are organizing this, or is there a central organization that goes out to the different countries?
in terms of with our work with Rescue Freedom, or with
in terms of how it occurs.
The traffickers?
Yeah.
So it's a mix. You definitely have the larger cartels, the larger mafias. Definitely organized crime is involved with this. You also have a lot of one-off pimps. We think of in the olden days we called them gentleman pimps that were they were kind of these independent guys that had one or two girls in their stable. That day is pretty much done. A lot of it is now quite organized. They're very well networked. We have challenges in a lot of countries that when a girl is receiving services from one of our providers, but she's picked up on the other end at the other airport because Mafia Link already called somebody there and is picking them up. And that's why we need our work to be just as interconnected as organized crime is today, to truly fight it, to keep them out of this life for good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Before you run off, it's our tradition to donate a book in your name to the South Sound Reading Foundation. And normally I would have that book here for you to sign before we turn it in, but I forgot. So I'm sure I'm going to pay a fine for that. But thank you. That is a great presentation and great work that you're doing.